Maribel stood alone in the dimly lit airport terminal, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering like a warning. She was just 18, scared and exhausted, her arms wrapped tightly around her belly as waves of pain rippled through her abdomen. The Manila airport bustled with travelers, none of them noticing the sweat on her forehead or the way she clutched at her side, biting her lip to stifle a cry. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She had come to Manila from a small coastal town in Mindoro to chase a promise. A nursing job overseas, a new life, a way to send money home to her sick mother. But 2 months before the departure date, she found out she was pregnant. The father, a man she'd met only briefly and who had long since vanished, was gone before the second trimester. Too proud to go back home, a disappointment. Too scared to check into a hospital she couldn't afford, she had kept her pregnancy hidden, wearing baggy clothes and staying in boarding houses near the airport. The night the labor started, she had nowhere else to go. With a plastic bag holding her few possessions and a cheap airline blanket she'd stolen weeks earlier for warmth, Maribel staggered into the women's restroom at the far end of Terminal 1. The stall smelled of bleach and rust, the floor sticky and cold beneath her bare feet. She crouched, groaning, whispering prayers between contractions that struck like tidal waves. No one came. No one heard. When the baby arrived, silent and slick, she thought for a moment he hadn't survived. Then, with a piercing cry that echoed through the tiled walls, he proved her wrong. Tears flooded her eyes. He was tiny, red, and fragile, but he was alive. Wrapping him in the airline blanket, she sat there trembling, her hands shaking as she stared at him. She had nothing. No money, no documents, no diapers, no idea what came next. A janitress entered the bathroom, saw the blood pooled under the stall, and ran out screaming. Moments later, airport security and paramedics rushed in, but Maribel had already made her decision. When one of the security guards found her in the adjacent corridor, she was alone. "There was no baby," she whispered. "I had stomach pain, that's all." The lie came out smooth, hollow, practiced. She had hidden the baby beneath the sink, tucked behind a trash bin, swaddled tightly with a note scribbled on the back of a bus ticket. "Please love him. I cannot." She disappeared into the crowd as authorities searched for answers. The baby was found minutes later, crying but healthy, and brought to a local hospital. Maribel, meanwhile, took the next bus to Cavite, then vanished from the grid entirely, finding work under a false name as a housemaid for a family that never asked questions. The child was adopted by a Filipino-American couple traveling through the Philippines who had seen the news broadcast and felt an inexplicable pull. They named him Elias. He grew up in California, never knowing the woman who left him or the terminal where he was born, but always wondering. His adoptive parents told him the truth early on, framing his origin not as abandonment, but as a story of sacrifice and survival. Elias was brilliant, curious, and driven. Fascinated by planes, he spent his childhood building model jets and reading about airports, without knowing the full circle his life would take. By the age of 10, he was already talking about becoming a pilot. At 16, he began flight training, earning his private pilot's license by 18 and his commercial certification by 21. He didn't just want to fly. He wanted to return. To Manila. To that terminal. Something inside him ached for the beginning he never saw. Meanwhile, Maribel aged into quiet obscurity, now in her late 30s, still living in the shadows, her face lined with regret. She had followed stories about the airport baby from afar, cutting newspaper clippings and watching online news pieces about Elias's adoption, his academic awards, even his pilot certification. But she never reached out. She never dared. Until one day, a letter arrived in Elias's mailbox, postmarked from Quezon City, with only a few haunting words written in careful, trembling script. "I was there the night you were born. I still remember your cry." Now, as fate begins to stir the winds of reunion, the woman who once hid her baby in a suitcase of shame may soon sit in seat 4A, watching her son in the captain's chair, with no idea he's about to bring her home for the first time in 20 years. If you felt this story touch your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for the next chapter. Maria had spent 2 decades building a life that, by all accounts, looked complete from the outside, But inside, her heart had never truly left that airport bathroom. The image of her newborn son's tiny face, blue from the cold, eyes not yet open, was burned into her soul. Every year on his birthday, she would light a candle at a small altar in her modest apartment in Manila, whispering prayers into the night. But she never told anyone the full story. Not her sister Anita, not her few close friends, not even Father Gregorio, who had watched her cry in confession too many times to count. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Daniel was living in Seattle, raised by his adoptive parents, Michael and Caroline Peterson, a retired Air Force couple who had found the baby alone in that airport bathroom 20 years ago during a layover. The news coverage had been swift and chaotic back then. Newborn abandoned at Terminal Gate 11. Daniel grew up in a warm, structured home. His adoptive parents were loving, gentle, and gave him everything: a stable home, an education, and most importantly, a belief that he was born for a reason. Michael always said, "You weren't abandoned, son. You were delivered to your destiny." As Daniel entered his 20s, his fascination with aviation grew into a full-blown calling. He worked tirelessly, first as a baggage handler, then as a flight attendant, and eventually earned his pilot's license. His dream was always the same: to fly to the Philippines, to look into the eyes of the woman who gave him life, and ask why. Back in Manila, Maria worked as a janitor in a public hospital. Every shift was a reminder of the night her body broke open in fear, alone among cold tiles and flickering lights. She had nothing when she gave birth, not even a clean blanket. She remembered wrapping her baby in her coat and leaving him in a stall near the hand dryer, hoping the heat would keep him alive. And she ran, not because she didn't love him, but because she did, because she had nothing to give him. Her job now barely paid enough for food, let alone the luxury of regret, but her nights were haunted. She imagined him tall, strong, with a dimple like her father's. Sometimes she thought she saw him in the faces of young men at the airport, where she still sometimes visited the chapel. That was her quiet tradition. On his birthday, she'd sit on one of the plastic chairs near the same bathroom and pray. Meanwhile, Daniel was planning his first solo trans-Pacific flight as a junior co-pilot on a commercial airline. The airline? Pacific Star Airways. Ironically, the same airline Maria had been trying to fly on the day she gave birth. As fate would script it, his assigned destination for his final evaluation, Ninoy Aquino International Airport, Manila. The day he landed, Maria was there, not for any reason she could explain. She had taken a day off and found herself wandering to Terminal 2. Something in her chest felt restless. Maybe it was just the date, 20 years exactly. Maybe it was the way the sun fell on the terminal glass. But her feet led her there, and she obeyed. As passengers deboard, Maria stood to the side, watching people reunite with families. She always kept her distance. That's when she saw him. A young man, tall, olive skin, jet black hair, dressed in a Navy uniform with gold stripes. He turned to help an older woman with her luggage. His smile was bright, but there was something in his eyes, a question maybe, or a kind of hunger she knew too well. Maria's heart kicked hard her chest. She didn't know why. Maybe it was madness or grief, but she followed him silently through the crowd. Daniel, for his part, was drawn to the airport chapel. He always lit a candle on his birthday, not for himself, but for his mystery, his mother. As he knelt, he felt a presence behind him. Maria stood there, breath shallow. Neither of them spoke at first, but when he turned, their eyes met, and though they didn't know it yet, the earth had just shifted. "Happy birthday," she whispered. He blinked. "How did you?" But the words caught in his throat. Her eyes filled with tears. "I think I know you." He stared, his mouth parted, and in that breathless silence, time rewound, collapsed, and unfolded all at once. This wasn't yet the reunion. Not fully, but it was the spark, the first truth, the beginning of something that would rewrite both their lives. What happens next will surprise you. But before we get there, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and change the soul. The plane wheels touched down on the Manila tarmac with a soft thud, but Maria felt the landing deep in her chest like an earthquake. She hadn't been to the Philippines in 20 years. The country she once ran from now looked cleaner, taller, richer, yet somehow lonelier. Her knuckles tightened around the armrest as the flight attendant smiled and thanked her for choosing Skyjet Airlines. Maria smiled politely, then reached for her bag, trying to steady her breathing. She didn't know what she expected to feel. Joy? Guilt? A reckoning? As she exited the jet bridge, her eyes scanned the terminal like a ghost returning to the scene of her own death. 20 years ago, she had left something behind. No, someone. A part of her heart still wrapped in a baby blanket and cradled by strangers. That baby should be a man now. Somewhere. Maybe here. Her legs trembled as she followed the signs toward customs. And behind her, passengers bustled with laughter and duty-free bags. She felt like the only person in the world drowning in silence. Outside the airport, the tropical heat pressed against her face. Palm trees swayed lazily as a luxury car pulled up with tinted windows. The driver stepped out and addressed her by name. Ma'am Maria Santos? She blinked. Yes. He smiled. I've been instructed to drive you to Tagaytay. The captain arranged everything. She nodded dumbly and climbed in. Captain, that word. It itched at something inside her. A sense of disbelief wrapped in a fragile hope. The ride was quiet. She stared out the window as the city blurred by. Jeepneys painted like pop art, vendors with plastic bags of water, little boys playing basketball barefoot on cracked concrete courts. Everything familiar, yet distant, like watching an old movie of your own life. As the car climbed into the hills of Tagaytay, fog drifted over the road, and a sprawling private villa came into view, guarded by iron gates. The driver spoke into a radio, and the gates opened slowly like arms unfolding to reveal a secret. She stepped out. Her legs almost gave out. A young man stood at the entrance, tall, crisp white uniform, black hair neatly combed, a face too perfect to be real. But it was the eyes. His eyes were hers, almond-shaped, dark, heavy with stories unsaid. Are you? She started, her voice cracking. He didn't speak. He just walked toward her and handed her something wrapped in plastic. Her hand shook as she peeled it open. It was her handkerchief, the same one she had embroidered at 17, when she still believed love could save you. I've had this my whole life, he said quietly. The nun at the orphanage said it belonged to my real mother. Said she left it the night she disappeared. Maria's eyes flooded. Her knees buckled. I'm sorry, she whispered. I wanted to stay, I swear I did, but I was 17 alone, scared they'd take you. And then they did. He didn't move. For a long moment, the wind was the only sound. Then, finally, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. She collapsed into him, sobbing. They stood like that, mother and son, not as strangers reunited, but as souls who had waited decades for this embrace. I searched for years, he murmured. I became a pilot because I thought if I kept flying, I'd find you somewhere in the skies. Maria laughed through her tears, and I kept praying someone up there would carry my love to you. He pulled back, studying her face. I don't need prayers anymore. I have you. That evening, over dinner on the villa's veranda overlooking the lake, Maria told him everything about her mother dying young, the abusive stepfather, how she ran away and lived in the airport for days, too afraid to go home, too ashamed to beg. She told him how she went into labor alone in a bathroom stall, how the janitor found her, and how the nuns had promised to protect the baby if she left. I never forgave myself, she whispered. Every year on your birthday, I'd light a candle and wonder, did you smile? Were you safe? Did someone sing to you when you cried? He took her hand. I had a good life, and now I want to give one to you. She shook her head in disbelief. You don't owe me anything. He smiled. But I want to. I already booked a return ticket. Her heart skipped. To where? Home, he said. To the Philippines. With me. Maria didn't know what tomorrow held, but for the first time in 2 decades, she felt like she had the right to imagine one. A future. A son. A life not weighed down by the past, but healed by what remained. As the moon rose over the lake and a gentle breeze carried the scent of jasmine, Maria rested her head on his shoulder. Thank you for finding me, she whispered. He kissed her forehead. I didn't. You never left me. Don't forget to like, comment your favorite moment, and subscribe for more real-life inspired stories that hit straight to the heart. Mateo stood there, frozen, one hand still resting on the cockpit door as the woman in front of him lifted her trembling gaze. Leah's lips parted slightly, the years etched into her expression, her shoulders hunched not with age, but with the unbearable weight of memory. She didn't speak. Neither did he. The hum of the airplane vibrated gently under their feet, but inside Mateo, there was a quake, one he couldn't name. "Captain, is everything all right?" the attendant asked, but his voice was background static. Mateo stared at her pendant, a rusted silver moon etched with a child's initials, MRL. His breath caught. He didn't remember the woman. But the pendant, that pendant lived in his dreams. For years, he'd seen flashes of a soft voice whispering lullabies, felt ghost hands patting his back. "Do I know you?" he finally said, not as a pilot, but as a lost boy staring into a mirror from the past. Leah's mouth trembled, and in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I've known you your whole life, Mateo." The air compressed. "I'm your mother." Silence shattered everything. Mateo's face didn't change, not at first. His pilot's discipline held, but his eyes betrayed the tremble. He blinked once, twice. "My what?" She clutched her hands in front of her chest like they could shield her from the pain she was about to receive. "I gave birth to you in this very airport. In a bathroom. I left you. Her voice cracked. "I didn't want to, but I had no choice. I've regretted it every single day since." Tears began to run silently down her cheeks. The crew looked away, pretending not to listen, but the story was taking root in the walls. Mateo's voice returned, but colder, jagged. "You left me in a suitcase." Her knees buckled, and she fell into a nearby seat, nodding. "Yes, but I watched. From a gate. I watched until someone found you. I left my necklace. I left your name." Mateo looked down, eyes narrowing. "Mateo." She nodded again, lips trembling. "Named after my father. Your grandfather." A silence stretched so long even the intercom seemed to wait. And then, without knowing why, Mateo took a step closer. "The couple who adopted me. They always said I came with a name, a note, and a necklace. I never knew who wrote it." Leah reached into her purse and pulled out a faded copy of the letter. The same handwriting, the same ink smudge on the O in Mateo. He sat beside her slowly, the leather seat creaking under his weight. "Why now?" he asked, barely audible. "Because this is the first time I could afford to be on this plane. I've cleaned offices for 19 years. I ate leftovers. I skipped my own birthdays. Also, I could someday look you in the eye and say, I never stopped loving you." Mateo turned away sharply, his jaw locked, blinking hard. He wanted to hate her. He wanted to ask why she didn't just keep him, why she didn't come back sooner, why she left him with the questions that had shaped his entire life. But all he could feel was the heaviness of her truth, of her scars, of her sacrifice. "You want to go back to the Philippines?" he asked. Leah nodded, clutching a tattered envelope of her passport and boarding pass. "I want to go home." He stood, looked down at her, and said with the softness of a son unsure if he should open the door, "I'll take you there." And just like that, he turned and walked back into the cockpit, the door sealing behind him. Leah sat still, tears slipping down her cheeks as a tiny smile appeared. In the air, at 35,000 feet, the sun she birthed alone on a cold tile floor was now flying her home. Life had come full circle, through pain, through silence, through the long years that tried to erase love. But love remembered. Always. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real, powerful stories that stay with you. The morning Rafael boarded the flight to Manila, the sky looked like it was holding its breath, heavy with clouds but calm, like it knew something sacred was about to unfold. He wore his pilot uniform for the first time on a personal trip, not because he had to, but because he wanted her to see him, not as the abandoned baby she once left behind, but as the man who grew from that moment. As the engines roared and the plane lifted, his heart beat louder than the turbines, echoing the words she had written in the final email. Asterisk, "I will be standing at the arrival's gate. I don't know if I deserve your forgiveness, but I'll be there Asterisk 20 years collapsed into that one sentence. Meanwhile, Maria stood in the crowd outside Ninoy Aquino International Airport, clutching a photo of Raphael as a baby that had long since yellowed. She had barely slept in days, rehearsing apologies that never sounded right, rewriting letters she'd never sent. When he finally appeared, walking through the gates with trembling lips and glassy eyes, Maria's body locked. Her legs refused to move, as if they feared she would shatter the second he came close. But Raphael stopped, looked around, and then spotted her. Their eyes met, and for the briefest second, neither moved. Then his face broke into something that looked like relief and ache all at once. He didn't run, didn't speak, just walked toward her until she could whisper, "It's you." He nodded, and before she could say another word, he wrapped his arms around her. Not gently, not hesitantly, fully, fiercely, as though he wasn't hugging a stranger, but reclaiming something taken from both of them by time, shame, and silence. People around them watched, unaware they were witnessing a reunion 2 decades in the making. Maria's knees buckled, and she sobbed into his chest, repeating, "I'm sorry," like a prayer. He held her tighter. "You gave me life," he whispered, "and now I'm giving it back to you." Hours later, in a modest Manila cafe, they shared their first meal together. Maria spoke in whispers, her voice still cracking from nerves and disbelief. Raphael showed her photos of his childhood, birthdays, baseball games, science fairs. Every moment she had missed, now placed before her like a second chance. She touched the screen gently, like touching his face for the first time. He told her about the Daltons, the couple who raised him with more love than he thought anyone deserved. And then he reached into his bag and handed her a plane ticket. "You're flying home with me," he said. "I don't care about the past anymore. I just want to know you." Maria stared at the ticket like it was a passport to another universe, to a life she thought she'd buried in that cold bathroom stall. Her lips trembled. "I don't have anything left here," she whispered. "Then it's time to begin again," he said. She nodded slowly. For the first time in years, she smiled, not out of politeness or survival, but something that felt frighteningly close to hope. She reached across the table, touched his hand, and this time, the plane touched down in Manila just as the sun began to rise over the jagged silhouettes of the distant mountains. Inside the cabin, Elena pressed her hand against the window, watching the country she had left 2 decades ago slowly emerge beneath a wash of gold and lavender. She hadn't seen this land in 20 years, hadn't smelled the thick scent of humidity clinging to banana trees, or heard the sing-song chatter of street vendors in Tagalog. And yet, it didn't feel foreign. It felt like the heartbeat she had buried, but never stopped listening for. Beside her in the cockpit, Captain Elias Soriano, her son, had his own quiet moment. He didn't speak as the wheels met the ground, but he reached out and gently touched the photograph clipped to his dashboard. It was old and faded, a photo of a young Filipino woman holding a swaddled baby in a hospital bed, the only picture Elena had managed to keep of their first and last moment together until now. The flight crew, including his co-pilot Mariana, had no idea that the elderly woman in row 1A was Elias's biological mother, the same woman who had tearfully abandoned him in an airport bathroom 20 years earlier. They didn't know the gut-wrenching path both had taken to this moment. The years Elias spent in foster care, the rare adoption by a kind-hearted couple in Missouri, the late nights as a teen working to support himself while attending flight school, or the letter from an anonymous sender that finally led him to the Philippines and ultimately to her. Nor did they know that Elena had watched every televised flight Elias ever gave interviews for, recognized the way his ears curled slightly at the top like hers, or that she had once been a nurse in this very city, saving lives while secretly wondering if hers had been left behind. Now, as the plane taxied toward the gate, Elena turned to her son, not as a stranger, not as a ghost from the past, but as a mother who had traveled through grief, guilt, and oceans to finally look her child in the eyes. "We're here," Elias said softly. He smiled, but his voice cracked. "Welcome home, Ma." And with that, every passenger exited, unaware of the miracle that had just landed. After the cabin was cleared, Elias didn't head to the pilot lounge. He walked her through the airport himself, pushing her wheelchair slowly through the terminal where, 20 years earlier, her cries had echoed off the bathroom tiles while her baby was whisked away in silence. As they passed the arrivals board, Elena stopped him. "Here," she whispered. "This is the corridor. This is where I prayed you'd find your way back." Elias nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. "And you did," Elena said, gripping his hand tightly. Later that day, in a small village north of Manila, a celebration erupted. Neighbors gathered to greet the boy who had once been lost and the mother who had waited. Banners with the words, "Welcome home, Captain Soriano," hung between coconut trees. Food lined the tables. Elena's sisters wept at the sight of her, arms around the tall, handsome pilot they had only known through photographs. Under the soft light of lanterns, Elena stood beside Elias and raised a glass. "I gave birth to my son in fear, in pain, and in hiding," she said. "But today, I welcome him with pride, with peace, and in the open." The crowd cheered. As the music played and laughter bloomed, Elena sat with her son under the stars. She looked at him and said, "You didn't just fly me home, you brought me back to life." Elias leaned in and rested his head against hers. For a moment, no words were needed, just the hum of crickets, the scent of mangoes in the warm air, and the knowledge that destiny may bend, delay, or wound, but it never forgets. And it always delivers when love is true. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more powerful human stories that remind us all what really matters.